When someone talks about a nonprofit, the first thing that comes to mind for most people is a 501c3 charity. Now, that makes sense given that the majority of nonprofits have this tax-exempt designation. But charitable nonprofits don't tell the whole story. There are also many other types of nonprofits whose work accomplishes important but non-commercial purposes, ranging from trade associations to recreational clubs to social welfare nonprofits. And it's the social welfare nonprofit, or 501c4, that we're going to be talking about today. Now, a 501c4 can go by a variety of names, including civic league, public benefit organization, or the title we already mentioned, social welfare nonprofit. And it's not so much the name that's important, seeing as most 501c4s, they're not going to use those terms necessarily to describe themselves anyway. What is important to understand is what a 501c4 is and what it does. The IRS says it this way, and I quote, "If you aren't organized for profit and will be operated primarily to promote social welfare to benefit the community, you may qualify for exemption under 501c4. So what exactly does social welfare mean? Social welfare describes an activity that benefits the public in a nonprofit, non-commercial manner, but that public benefit isn't charitable in nature. If it sounds like that could cover an awful lot of ground, well, you're right, it does. So what are some classic examples of 501c4 nonprofits? Let's look at a few. First up is Homeowners Associations. Yes, it's true. An HOA usually qualifies to be tax exempt under 501c4. And while its beneficiary group is limited, the activity is public benefit in nature because it seeks to better the community it represents. Its activities aren't commercial, and that's usually because there's no goods or services sold. Most HOAs collect dues from member homeowners and then use those funds to maintain public spaces within the community. That's public benefit. Next, let's look at advocacy groups. Now, by advocacy group, I'm specifically talking about a nonprofit that educates and advocates for certain causes, issues, or points of view. Even within this category, the range is pretty broad. Examples include organizations as diverse as the National Rifle Association, the Sierra Club, and even issue enemies like NARAL, Pro-Choice America, and the National Right to Life. Enemies indeed. What makes these groups similar is the nature of their activity: inform, educate, and influence. Notice also that none of these are remotely neutral in their topic of advocacy. I intentionally chose 4 very polarizing examples to illustrate the extreme diversity of possibilities. Another point to make about advocacy groups: most of them could qualify to be 501c3 educational organizations, but they're not. Now, reasons vary, but most choose 501c4 status because they aren't limited in their ability to spend large sums of money lobbying policymakers for legislative change, unlike 501c3s. Since donations to 501c4s aren't tax deductible to the donor, the IRS really doesn't restrict lobbying in the same way. Interestingly, many well-known advocacy groups have established their own charitable foundations to cover strictly 501c3 qualifying activities. Okay, now, political groups are our next example. Now, these groups usually have as their primary mission the election of candidates for public office. And it gets pretty murky pretty quickly, as these groups are often confused for political action committees or PACs, 527s, or even an actual candidates election committee. While it can often appear that they're all doing the same thing, a 501c4 political group is actually prohibited by law from coordinating directly with the candidate's campaign, even if 100% of their effort is to benefit that candidate. Now let's pause for a minute to laugh at the notion that these guys don't coordinate together. Well, sarcasm and cynicism aside, most political 501c4s work toward promoting the electoral prospects of a slate of candidates who represent the particular interest perspective, whether broad, Democrat versus Republican, for example, or narrow, progressive versus conservative. The last category we're going to talk about are public accommodations. These are some of the more interesting 501c4 types, and they're typically very targeted in scope and even geographical reach. Now, here's a bizarre example the IRS uses in some of its publications. An organization operating an airport that serves the general public in an area with no other airport that is on land owned by a local government which supervises the airport's operation. Is that specific enough for you? Other public accommodation examples include volunteer fire departments, an annual festival of regional customs and traditions, as well as maybe a free community newspaper that is nonprofit in nature. Now, starting a 501c4 is very similar to starting any other type of nonprofit. It usually starts with incorporating the entity at the state level, then proceeds to applying to the IRS for tax-exempt status. Well, if that sounds identical to a 501c3, it is similar, but it's different. 501c3 groups use Form 1023, for example, while 501c4 groups use Form 1024 or Form 1024A. Beginning in 2021, the IRS eliminated the paper version of that form and put it all online at pay.gov. Foundation Group works with dozens of 501c4 startups each year, so if you need help getting started, come talk to us, we can help you out. Donations to 501c4 nonprofits are not tax deductible to the donor, even though the organization is itself tax exempt. Why is that? Well, the IRS only allows tax deductions for donations to 501c3 nonprofits, not social welfare groups. Now, because of this, we've counseled with no small number of advocacy clients who insisted on applying for 501c3 status as an educational organization instead of being a 501c4, even though 501c4 was such a better fit for them. The founders were worried that potential supporters wouldn't get a tax break, so they decided to go for 501c3. Now, for the most part, this is simply wrong thinking. If 501c4 is a better fit, especially when lobbying and campaign activity is involved, choose 501c4. It makes no sense to tie your hands with the strict limits and prohibitions inherent to a 501c3 when it's not the best choice. All across the country, donors give millions upon millions to 501c4 groups, even though they get no tax deduction for it. They do it because they're what we call true believers. They put their money where their passions are. We've never seen a 501c4 lose out on donations simply because it wasn't tax deductible to the donor. A lack of donors is always because of other reasons. 501c4 nonprofits are a diverse and interesting category of organization that serve very specific and very targeted purposes. Every day, all across the country, these groups are making a difference as they serve their unique communities. Chances are you've been involved with one of these and didn't even realize it was a 501c4. Well, now you know. That's it for this video. If you liked it, make sure and click the like button. Subscribe if you haven't already, and don't forget the little bell icon to be sure and be notified of new content when we post it. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.